Democracy Work, a monthly program brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Honolulu. This month, we're going to talk about affordable housing, which has been on everyone's minds for forever. And so today we have with us members of the Faith Action HousingNow coalition. We have with us the co-chair, Keith Webster, and Galen Fox, a member of the coalition. I am Pearl Johnson of the League of Women Voters, and with me is my co-host, Kaui Lucas. Thank you all for coming.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Mm-hmm.
So, Keith, before we dive into the summit that's coming up on September 21st, can you give us a little background about Faith Action?
Sure. So Faith Action has been around for about 23 years now. We're a Hawaii nonprofit, and we're an organization made up of organizations. So churches and temples, we've got a trade union, we've got a variety of organizations that come together, and we work on things that are important to the quality of life for our members. So over the years, we've done things like working on the bus shelters. Before there were bus shelters, our kapuna felt that we needed them. So we pushed for that, and we were helping lead that effort to put in bus shelters to shelter people waiting. We've also, when people didn't have, and Mayor Wright Housing didn't have water, hot running water, we led the push, and we organized the residents so that they could push for that running water and that hot water, which is so important. So we're doing a number of things. We work on long-term care, we work on all kinds of issues, but housing has been a big one from the beginning, and that's because we've had a housing crisis in Hawaii for 40 years. And it was a crisis then, and people talked about it and said we need to do something, and here we are 40 years later, we're still talking about it, and it's an even bigger crisis than it was. So we're putting on a housing summit. This is something to try to, and I think the timing is right now. It's time to stop talking, it's time to start building. But it's not easy, and so we're going to be having a housing summit on September 21st, and it'll be in the Art Auditorium at UH, and we hope everybody can come, because this is where we're going to work with everybody to see where each of us fits in building this housing. There's a lot of ways to build housing. We've got affordable housing programs. We've got people just building 3-story walk-ups. We've got people adding in ADUs, accessory dwelling units. There's a lot of ways that we're going to get to the 17,000 units that we need. And everyone can have a place in trying to make that happen. And so the summit is where we're going to come together, and we're going to let people decide, where they fit in, how they can help us house the people in Hawaii.
Well, I've already RSVP'd, which
good.
I think we should say you can do if you go to the Faith Action Facebook page, and the event is listed there. Again, it's called the Affordable Housing Summit, and it's free. And there's a parking charge, but if you park at Church of the Crossroads, you'll be able to park for free. So there's no economic barriers to attending. So I understand that, Galen, you and Keith went on a long trip and learned about some approaches that are working in Singapore. Can you talk about that a little?
Well, there is a place in the world that has solved the housing crisis, basically, and it's Singapore. And Senator Stanley Chang, who is chair of the Housing Committee and will be a speaker at the summit, realized that maybe he could get people in Hawaii to look at this better if he actually took them to Singapore. So it was a terrific program. We really went there and saw what makes Singapore so successful. And basically, you have to understand that this is an area about 1/3 the size of Oahu, the entire country of Singapore, with nearly 6 million people, and they're all housed. 90% of the population owns their own home. 80% of the population lives in what we would know as public housing. And that means obviously you've got people of all economic classes living together in these projects. And we're still trying to figure out how we could finance this idea in Hawaii, but it certainly shows us that's one place in the world they've figured out how to solve their housing crisis. And I do want to say we have the worst housing crisis in the country, measured in terms of our average income in relation to the average rental of property. It's the
Galen,
worst in the country.
I'm sure everybody who live in Hawaii will agree with you on that.
What kind of people are you having at this summit?
You mean it's part of the program? Keith talked about some of the things we're looking at.
So who's speaking?
Well, we've got a number of people speaking. We'll have people from the state and from the Department of Planning that are going to be talking about what we want to do is paint a picture of how do you build these different types of housing. How do you begin with it, and what are the blocks? Why can we not build enough? Because we are building some housing, but we need to build a lot more. So he's mentioned that we have Senator Stanley Chang who will be talking about his Aloha Homes. That's where we're going to be talking about building usually high-density housing, which would be in a multi-rise type of thing, probably financed by the state. But the idea is that if you can get your construction costs down far enough, you can sell them basically at cost, and there's no long-term cost for the state, but you can still house everyone. We'll have, in the finance part of it, we'll have Peter Ho from the Bank of Hawaii, and he'll be representing, along with other people, about the financial part of this. Housing is very expensive, and so a lot of it is figuring out how are we going to finance these different things? How are we going to build them in a way that they're affordable, and then how do we finance that? Where does the money come from, whether it's from traditional finance vehicles or whether it's from a subsidy? There's going to be a variety of avenues to do it. And so we're going to start out with planning, because the big thing I learned in Singapore, my big takeaway was that you can't do something if you don't have a vision of where you're going. And we wanted to see what is housing going to look like on Oahu in 20 years. And when we came back, they had a great plan. In Singapore, they had a model of what it was going to look like in the future. And so I came back to Oahu and I said, well, what's our plan? And we do have a plan. And so we're going to be working with the UH, and we'll have not a model, but we'll have some pictures that show what is the vision for the different parts of the island. And how can we, using infill primarily, to increase the density of affordable housing in the urban core, handle the environmental objections, and keep the country, because we do want to make sure we have housing for our working people, but we don't want to just expand out over the whole island. And so we'll have planning people, we'll have finance, we're going to have a variety of people talking about the different ways to house. In other words, the different vehicles, the ADUs, the Stanley Changs, and the 3-story walk-up like Bill 7. But a big part of this is really accountability, and this is for the legislators who will be there, it's for the government people, for their staff, but it's also for each of us individually, because housing in the future is going to take all of us to bring it together, and we all have a piece. So it'll be a chance for us all to reflect on where do we fit in, what can we do individually, and what can we commit to in the next year to move this forward to 17,000 in the next 6 years.
So, Keith, you said something that I don't know. What's Bill 7?
Yeah.
Okay, this is
So-
a Galen thing.
No, I think it's actually more Keith, but anyway.
Well, go for it.
Bill 7 is the realization that the most effective way to build inexpensive housing is not by building towering high-rises, it's to build walk-ups. Those are the most, per unit, most inexpensive housing. We want to throw up a lot of housing for people at the lower income levels. 3/4 of the actual need for housing is for people who make 80% of Honolulu's median income or less. That's where the need really is. Fantastically, the need is at the bottom and the stuff that's being built is at the top. So Bill 7 makes it easier for people to get in there and build multi-story walk-up housing. That's great for infill in the urban areas. That makes it's going to be easier for people to deal with their transportation issues, and it's cheaper. So it's a good way to go to reach our target of 17,000. At some point, I would like to explain how we got to 17,000.
Well, now seems like a good time.
Okay, so there was a study done on affordable housing by the state, and they set the target of reaching people at a certain income level. And I did have a chart that might be displayed.
Sure. Well, we can do that.
Okay, so the trouble is there's a fight over what the definitions of affordable housing is. We say it's at the 80% level or less. So if you look at their figures on where the need is.
Okay, wait, their figures.
The
Who's
state,
they?
the state,
Okay.
the people that put together this study.
Okay.
They, using their figures, 80% and below on the island of Oahu, and this conference is about the island of Oahu, although the need, of course, is statewide. On the island of Oahu, the need for housing at that level is 17,000, and the target is to do that by 2026. This is an extremely ambitious target. But in a way, we're tired of seeing units of 80 housing projects of 80 units opening up with a ribbon cutting, when we know that the need is really in the thousands and 17,000 by 2026, a target identified by the state. So let's go after that.
Yeah, and to put that into context, so we're talking about a percentage of AMI, which is the area median income, which I think last year for a family of 4 was about $93,000. Is that right? So we're talking about 80% and below. This is housing that's affordable to people making about $73,000, $75,000. And affordable, we're using the definition, the federal definition, is where that their housing cost is going to be a third of their income or less, right? So we're not spending 50, 60% of our income on housing. It's going to be 30% or less. So if we use those definitions, that gives you a certain amount of money that you've got available per month, which gives you a certain amount of financing that you could use to build this housing. And the challenge really is that it's not hard to build housing for people that are 140% of AMI. You can do that profitably today. The developers are doing that. But at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%, it typically takes some subsidy because the housing, it just costs more to build than there's money available. And so we're concentrating both on building different kinds of housing. Galen mentioned that the lower rise housing is less expensive per unit. And so that's very useful for building affordable housing. But it's also a matter of figuring out where is the money going to come from for the subsidy that will be required. And you know, and one exciting thing that Stanley Chang mentioned, but could actually be even expanded, is building some housing on state land, which is leased for, say, 99 years. That was one model that's being proposed. So people could actually own their units, right, but they don't own the land. It's leasehold. That has a couple of advantages for people that are wanting housing to live in versus housing to invest in, right? Because leasehold property is not as good of an investment. But it's housing, and you can live there, right? And it's still your unit. You own it. You can pay it off, and you can still retire in Hawaii.
That is such an important concept. I just want to have a little pause there to talk about that difference because it affects everything around housing. If it's really to house people, to provide shelter and a home, or if it's an economic instrument that is an investment. And somehow in Hawaii we've gotten them terribly mixed up.
Well, it's you know, housing, real estate in Hawaii has been a very good investment right, for a long time. And the people that have the money invest in it, and they've done very well over the years. And so we are known as a good place to invest in real estate, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. But we have to house our workforce, and the housing price, the land prices have gotten so high, as well as we have our construction prices. So how do you get the price down? One way would be, keeping this housing is really not the best investment, but for people that want to live here and want to work here and be a part of our community, it just opens up avenues, and we can make it affordable. That's what the Housing Summit's about, talking about all the different things that have to come together to make that happen.
And how to make it really for local people who live and work here.
Right.
I want to talk again about the three-story walk-up. I lived on the East Coast for 15 years, and they call those garden apartments. And they're not subject to the accessibility, the ADA Act. They don't have to have an elevator. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. And of course, ADA is a consideration. So you have to, the ground floor is going to be reserved for.
I see.
You start out with a project, you're going to make sure that it's ADA compliant for part of the population. They can have first shot at the ground floor units.
Right. And so many single housing lots could hold a garden apartment
Absolutely.
that would house 10 people, 10 families. It would be really. So what does your bill do to make it possible?
Well, do you know more about the bill than I do?
Well, I can't go into the details of the bill, but in general, it was designed to make it less expensive for people to develop their properties by easing some of the restrictions and taking off some of the costs. So it's easier to get the zoning. It's easier to some of the permitting that's required usually. They've made it easier to get. And so I don't have the details, but it is Bill 7.
I see.
It's very important to do this development to the extent we can along the rail line. And, the laws are already in place to encourage development near rail line stops. And what we're trying to do is bring down the cost of housing so that it's affordable to the people that are desperately in need of housing, and even going right down to another tremendous problem we have in this community, which is homeless, who are, unsheltered homeless. It's really important to get that population under roof as well. So that's part of the whole idea. If you build along the rail line, you don't have to necessarily build so much parking, and that is a key cost of housing. So. I think it's a really good idea to take state land, county land that's along the rail, and use that for high-rise development that will help solve our problem, and also in the same neighborhoods where it works out, you can build 3-story, 2-story walk-ups and really tackle our problem. I think that 17,000 figure is very important because that focuses on our real need. You can't walk in and say, okay, we built a few units here. We hope that the summit will bring people together who will say, yes, we really do have to set out to solve this problem. 17,000, and you were referring to some of the stuff that makes sure we're dealing with local people. This is in Senator Chang's idea of the Aloha housing, and that is people who get these units will own them on leasehold land. They will only own one property, and they will live in the unit they own. That really transforms the whole picture, away from housing as investment, as housing to a place to live. And it also helps keep it affordable. When you want to move out of your unit, you sell it back to the government, and the government, then sells it to, or you sell it to somebody who's qualified to buy it, either one.
So there's a lot of models, but I think the goal is permanent affordable housing. One
Yeah,
way or another,
good.
we're going to have a need for affordable housing for people, for workforce housing today. We've got it today. It'll be in 20 years, in 40 years, 100 years. We need affordable housing. So we can't let it just cycle out and be going to market. And so finding strategies for building affordable housing and then keeping it affordable,
Permanently affordable.
permanently affordable. That's really the key, right?
Yeah.
At this summit, you're welcoming ordinary citizens, not just
Absolutely.
builders and financiers.
Yeah, our members will be there, right? And these are members of the churches and the temples, the trade unions. So these are the regular workers that are all around us. And we're all there. Everyone is welcome, right? This is for everybody to come in because everybody is affected by housing, right? And the housing shortage.
I will say in this community, we're up against a problem, and that is the misuse of the word affordable.
Yeah.
We have a definition of affordable that allows a project to qualify as building affordable housing for people who make, $150,000 a year. This is ridiculous. We really want to drive through this summit the idea of building housing for the people who really need it. And we know the demand is tremendous. So there's no reason that construction workers and the development industry can't throw in with this, because they'll have people that will buy the units that are constructed by labor and by developers.
So what needs to change for that, for those numbers to be where they need to be? How do we change that threshold so that it's something that's really going to be for the people who need it?
Well, there's several answers to that, and that's really the complexity of housing. But I'm going to say that the first thing you need is that vision. And if we have a community vision, a plan of what are we going to build and where are we going to build it, because one of the things that drives up cost is us just bickering about what we're going to build where. And we tend to do that project by project. And the idea of having a master plan, which we have, a development plan for the different parts of the island, but we need to let people know what it is. And let's talk about the plan and say, do we want this neighborhood to look like this? Is this what we want in that neighborhood? But then once we've made that decision, let's let it happen. And let's not have to fight over project by project. So that's the first part of streamlining it, which is bringing the cost down. We're also going to talk about finance, because financing costs are very, very high. So Senator Chang, he has the idea of, well, let's use government bonds, because that's a very inexpensive form of funding. And so there may be a way to do some of that. But there's certainly always going to be a place for private financing too. And that's why we have the Hawaii banks in there as well, because we need to look at how do we get things streamlined? How do we get the cost down? Part of it is speeding it up, because time costs money. And so if we can get the whole process streamlined, we can bring down the cost. And that gets into planning and permitting, and we'll have the planning and permitting people there too, to look at how can we speed up the permitting. And they've done this in some of the other counties for affordable housing. And there's, I think, something we can broach here on Oahu too, and that it doesn't have to take a year or a year and a half to get your permits to build this, because that all adds to the cost.
At your summit, you will be presenting the plan for how you are going to put housing. I mean, you'll have a map, is that it?
So yes, we'll have a map of the island with showing the different areas, because we have land that's in conservation, right? We have land in agriculture, and the idea of infill in the urban core, which means increasing density in our urban core, is to preserve these other areas so they can stay that way, to preserve the nature of Hawaii, the beauty of Hawaii.
So you'll be able to tell people, say, in Mo'iliili, we want so many housing units? Is that how detailed?
We're not giving
Not
our
that far
plan.
along.
We're going to be giving, it's actually the city's development plan, and we'll be presenting that, right? So that you'll be able to see what is the planned density for that area. And I don't know if we've got a specific number of units for each area, but it would be a density per area.
So we're talking about the city's development plan that has already gone through all these approvals. I see.
Yeah, but so many of us, and I mean included, really didn't know it existed. And I don't think I'm the only one that didn't know that we had a plan. So it's there, and the people that know it, know it. But I think we need to get this out to the community, because when someone makes a zoning request, it feels like it's just an exception. Every project's an exception. And I think it would help to know that, well, no, that building actually is a part of our plan, right? That fits the nature of what we thought we wanted there. But over here, it doesn't, right?
So at the summit, people will be able to see what the areas are that things have already been planned for and permitted.
Right. So we have an urban core development plan that we'll go into in a little bit of detail. And then there's transit-oriented development special area plans, and we'll talk about those too.
And our background today, some people may recognize as the part of the rail that is not infill.
Right.
And this isn't what the summit is advocating for, right? We don't want to be turning our agricultural lands into transit-oriented development.
Correct.
We would rather do it in the urban core. I just wanted to make a little
I'm glad you brought that
disclaimer.
up. We have very little time left. Is there something that we wanted to bring up that we haven't yet?
I guess not.
All right, wonderful.
I guess I would say, remember, taking
Good.
care of the homeless is
Yes.
an important part of this.
All right, so now we can wrap up. And thank you very much to Keith Webster and Galen Fox of the Faith Action HousingNow Coalition. Thank you, Kaui, my co-host. I am Pearl Johnson with the League of Women Voters. Thank you for watching. And do watch us before and after the Housing Summit, which is on September 21st.